we're gonna put a pin in that, and we're gonna bring in our guest, and then when we're done with Jim, we'll talk some more WWE. I'm not touching shit.
Mr. Fannin, welcome aboard.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Cool.
Cool. That's the best you got, Brenda. This is all Brenda's.
No, I'm losing my voice. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's
a
the
great
second
fucking
J
timing.
for?
Well, you come in, and this is the time of the year to lose your voice. You got the weather. One day it's 20, the next day it's 70, then it's back to 30, and everybody where I'm here in Chicago, it's sinus infections galore going off.
We don't want that. Hey, well, Jim, what's the second J for? You're JJ. What's the second J?
So, funny story on that is Chris Candido, when he came in for IWA and was a member of the Fannin family back in 2004, 2005. When he came in, he always would just call me JJ. And he pictured us like the IWA's version of the Four Horsemen. He pictured himself as Ric Flair, so he pictured me as JJ Dillon. And he just called me JJ all the time. And I kind of liked that, so I, stuck with it and used it. And then when Chris passed away and his brother was going through his phone, making calls to people to let them know that Chris had passed, when he called me, he's like, I got to know, is this JJ Dillon? And I was like, no, this is not JJ Dillon. And he was like, man, every time he went to IWA, he would always talk about hanging out with JJ. And we thought that like Ian was bringing in JJ Dillon. And I was like, no, Ian wasn't springing for that budget. But, that was just what he called me. So ever since then, I've sort of just, kept it. There was a couple of places I worked where there was a lot of Jims and James, and they were like, is there anything else that we can call you to differentiate between everybody? And I was like, oh, let's go with JJ. So something I've, held on to and kept close to me all these years. So that's where the JJ comes from.
Nice.
So you're making the return. How long have you been out of the game for?
It's been 16 years. I left IWA in 2009, August of 2009, and I mentioned the passing of Chris Candido, and it was a passing of Mark Wolf. I had just had him on the podcast, interviewed him right after Thanksgiving, and he ended up passing away right before Christmas. And when I had him on and was talking with him and just going over our memories of IWA, and he was telling me how much it pained him that his body had broken down, and he was doing he was helping people train in North Carolina, and he had like worked with Jackie Fargo over the years and Bobby Fulton, and was like helping train guys, and like his body just gave out. His back wouldn't allow it anymore. His knees and hips wouldn't allow it. And he was just telling me like how bad that hurt him, that, he just couldn't do it anymore. And so after he passed, I started getting an idea of, for the people like Chris and the people like Mark who, loved this, and it was their life and something that they, wanted to do and gave their lives to, and that they had that taken away from them. And so I started talking to Nick Manawa, and I was like, do you think there's a place for me? Do you think anybody wants to see this? Is this crazy with as long as I've been gone? And he's like, well, it is crazy. He's like, but he's like, let's give it a shot and put it out there that you're trying, and see if anybody will bring you in, and you let their memory can live on in me, and I can do something that they wish that they had I'm not a spring chicken anymore either, with as long as I've been out. So, it was just something where I was like, if I'm going to do this, I gotta do it now, kind of thing, while I still can. And so I went ahead and put it out there. And so far I've got Black Label Pro and Wrestle Arts, both out of Indianapolis, this coming weekend, that is going to give me a shot. And maybe that'll get my name back out there, and some folks can see whether I still got it or not, or debate whether I even had it to begin with. And
go ahead, Double T.
Now, JJ, for those not familiar, you're a ring announcer, right? You're not, or are you a worker as well in terms of
manager?
Okay,
so
you might be brand new to our audience, so a little backstory to what's going on with you.
Yeah, so for 12 years in IWA, I did everything. Started as a ring announcer, went to manager, had like 8 or 9 matches where I actually had a tag match where I got pinned by Road Dogg, wrestled Dave Prazak in my first match. So, not much in the way of being an actual wrestler, but I did over 400 shows in IWA. I managed, had Chris Hero, CM Punk, Tracy Smothers, Chris Candido, managed against Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk. So, some people are telling me, it's going to be like riding a bike, and I'll be able to get back out there and pick it right back up, and we'll see how that goes, but definitely looking forward to this weekend.
So there's one match I specifically remember you having, and I can't imagine being across from a more intimidating guy, because I think it was one of the King of the Death matches where you got to wrestle Bull Payne. What was that like?
That was a fun time. Bull Payne, Mark Wolf, and myself, we actually were all working at the same Home Depot in Southern Indiana. There was a fan that came to all the shows and sat in the front row. He was the store manager, and everybody just called him Home Depot Mike. And so if you watch any of the early 2000 IWAs, you can see Home Depot Mike in a Hawaiian shirt sitting in the front row. And he was the store manager for this Home Depot. And so he hired Mark Wolf, he hired Bull Payne, he hired me, and we worked overnight shift. Bull Payne was in where he would receive everything and get it off the truck. And then me and Mark were part of the freight team that would put it out and stock it overnight. And so we were building up that match, and nobody that we worked with overnight thought that the match was going to happen. They're like, there's no way that you're going to wrestle him. And I just kept talking shit and going, I've got this. And, Mark Wolf would like try to give me training tips, and I lived like a mile away from the Home Depot. So every night I would go home for our lunch break and just eat at home and then come back. Well, I stopped doing that. I'd go out in the parking lot and do jumping jacks and sit-ups and do all these different calisthenics. And like the rest of the guys would come out like and do a smoke break, and they'd be watching Mark put me through all these drills out in the parking lot. And they were like, holy shit, he's actually going to do this. He's actually going to do this. And then like we would go get our stuff from receiving, and I'd start yelling at Bull, and then Mark would have to hold the two of us back, and we'd be cutting promos on each other. And so about 5 people ended up buying tickets to King of the Death to come out and watch that match. And so when the match didn't happen, and Mitch Page and BJ Whitmer and Danny Daniels all come out and jump Bull Payne, they did not talk to me for 3 weeks at work after that. They were so mad because King of the Death matches were our most expensive ticket in the year, and they paid to come out and watch it. And they thought for sure that because I was doing the training and getting prepared, and I think I'd even lost about 10 pounds to where they could notice that I had lost some weight. And they were so mad when that happened. But
You guys working at Home Depot to get that employee discount for your gimmicks?
No, we ended up getting discounts, but not because we worked there. Like anytime a door or something would come in and get damaged, Home Depot Mike would write it off and then bring it to the show, and we could break a table, or we got a bunch of like drywall that wasn't pristine condition, so we got like a big discount on some slightly damaged drywall to put up on the wall. And because we would constantly, in that Charlestown building in like 2001 2002, we would constantly like throw people into the drywall and bust it, because then we would just get replacements from Home Depot Mike on the cheap. And so it was a good advantage. And I had been working at UPS because the big all of their air, anything that you send air, goes to Louisville, Kentucky to be sorted at their main hub there, and then gets sent back out. So I had worked there for 3 years, and this is how old I am. At the end of my third year, I was making $8.50 an hour working the UPS warehouse. And they had switched over to a new building, and they spent like $1 billion to build this new warehouse in Louisville. And they didn't test it before they opened it. And when they opened it, like, it was supposed to be like all this big automation, and all these scanners would read the labels and take it right where it needed to go. And all we would have to do is grab it off the belt, and, you wouldn't have to have all these pre-sorters and everything. Well, when they opened it up in July in Kentucky in a metal warehouse. So it's like 130 degrees in this warehouse. And so there's all these fans blowing so that we wouldn't die of, heat stroke in there. But it was blowing dust around because it was just a big warehouse, and the dust was blocking the state-of-the-art $1 billion scanners. So the belts would always turn off. And they would just like scream bloody murder that, we weren't working fast enough. It's like, it's your equipment that you didn't test first, so their solution at first was, well, we just won't have any fans going. So I'm like a 280-pound guy trying to work in this warehouse, and my red t-shirt would be white at the end of my shift from how much sweat I would have. And I would load my can, I'd push it out to the airplane, I'd stop and drink some water, and then I'd go back. And this supervisor, she was like an 85-pound woman, and she came up to me and she's like, "You're drinking too much water." And it's like, well, I'm sorry that I'm actually doing something while you're just standing here holding a clipboard. If I was 80 pounds and just holding a clipboard, I wouldn't have to drink so much water. And I was like, you know what? The hell with this. And so I quit. And then Home Depot Mike hired me at $10 an hour immediately to start at Home Depot. And I was like, well, that's a hell of a lot better gig for me. And he was like, but don't you tell anybody what I'm paying you, because everybody else was making less than that. And I was like, well, I kept a secret for 24 years, I guess. So
you got that 10 on the hush.
The evolution of independent wrestling fans. Home Depot Mike 20 years ago, and then there was like Piss Jug Guy. I think I would much rather be Home Depot Mike.
Oh yeah.
You have Jim, you have your Fannins flashbacks,
yes.
And it's on your YouTube channel. Give us a little bit about that podcast that you're doing now, going back through the IWA Mid South archives there.
Yeah, so we're another one where I was talking with Nick Manawa, and it started when GCW put Mitch Page and Roland Hard into their Deathmatch Hall of Fame back in June. And that was like the first time I went to a wrestling thing in ages. But I had to be there to see Mitch and Roland, because I managed them when they first started teaming up, and managed them for Roland's last match. And I was like, I got to be there to support Roland's. So then I ended up actually accepting the award on Roland's behalf since he had passed away. And it made me start talking to Nick about, my legacy. And, nobody knows who I am. Nobody remembers me from that long ago. One of my buddies kept mentioning to me, he's like, oh, well, this guy you're on the show with, he's like a legend now. And you quit 3 years before he had his first match. And oh, this person on the show, they were 3 years old when you had your last appearance. And I was like, okay, I get it. I'm old. You don't need to keep rubbing it in kind of thing. But, I was just sitting there talking to Nick, and I'm like, what is there that I can do? Try to make sure that there's so many of us from IWA at that time that are just forgotten now. There's so many fans that just don't remember and never watched it, never anything. And I was like, there's so many stories to be told. And we decided that, I should do this podcast, just have some of the old IWA names that came up with me, just tell our stories, tell the fans some of the crazy shit that happened back then. And, there's 5 million stories out there about Ian Rotten. 3 million of them are true. Some of them have a touch of truth to them. And, let's tell these stories and, cause we're starting to die off. Fans that were there, we've lost so many fans that used to be our regulars. And it's like, these stories are going to die with us if we don't tell them. So I started doing the flashbacks episodes. And at first I thought, if I can get 10 people to watch this, 10 people to listen to it, it's worth doing. And we've gotten to the point where several of the episodes have gotten over 500 views on YouTube. And that doesn't count like the Spotify and iHeart and everything else that we put it up on. So it's been a lot more successful than what I thought. We got not quite ready to announce it, but we've got a deal in place that will hopefully get more eyes onto the podcast. And, it's been a lot of fun catching up. A lot of these guys I was on shows with for a decade and really never had any conversations with them. It would just be hi, bye, and maybe talk over, like if you were actually in the match with them and, getting to actually sit down and have conversations for the first time with Tarek the Great, an American kickboxer, and, getting Mark onto the podcast before he passed away, and Chucky Smooth, and just like all these guys that have all these great stories to tell. And it's been so much fun to actually get to do that. Hopefully I'm supposed to record with Bull Payne tomorrow. I had him scheduled before, and he ended up having to cancel because of some health issues. And so I was like, Bull, you'd be the perfect guest to have on. We just did a tribute to Mark Wolf that came out on Friday. We release every Friday with a new episode. I was like, you would be the perfect guest because it was, the BMFers versus Mark Wolf. That was the feud. It was like, so Bull had sent in a little thing that I read on the podcast for the tribute to Mark, but I was like, let's get you on this thing and let's do this. So we're going to try again tomorrow. I can't guarantee that it actually happens because, it's wrestling. I've had a lot of cancellations and had to squirm at the and try to dig things up. But, the amount of guys that have reached out to me and been like, is there any way that you can get me on? And I'm like, well, I've got a list. So there's a waiting list. We'll get to you. Your spot may come up sooner based on who ends up canceling at different times. But, it's been a really good experience. I've been blown away by the positive feedback that it's gotten. And then I had Nate Webb on the podcast. So then he invited me to go hang out with him when he came to Chicago for GCW just a couple weeks ago. So I went and hung out there, and 4 or 5 of the guys came up and were like, man, that episode, when you said this on the episode, that reminded me of my interaction with, and I was like, I just can't believe the amount of people that have actually tuned in and listened and want to be a part of it. So it's been a positive experience.
Well, I think there's a whole generation, right, of wrestling fans who grew up during that era where there was WWF, WWE, and then there was just the indies. I did not watch the IWA Mid South growing up. I knew very little about it, but Brundo was like, look, man, IWA Mid South, he was there during the Chris Hero, Colt Cabana, CM Punk. I'm sure he has tons of stories, and that, all those names that shaped this generation of pro wrestlers, right? So like all these kids that grew up with this, like they want this, right? We've got a fucking zillion podcasts with Bruce Pritchard and the fucking Undertaker and his dumb wife telling stories, right? But then like nobody's telling these IWA Mid South stories. So like, this is a breath of fresh air. This is stuff people want to hear about. You said a lot of people have reached out to you. Who's the most surprising person who's reached out and said they want to be a part of your show?
Well, they weren't the ones that reached out, but Nick had reached out, and the fact that Jimmy Jacobs came onto the podcast and we were screen to screen talking about me trying to kill him with the barbed wire bat, and there was some tense moments in that one. And that one's definitely one that I suggest people go, and like it blew people's minds when that was announced. They were like, what? How did this happen? And, there was very little talking beforehand. It was just, okay, I'll come on. I didn't believe it until he popped up on the screen, and I was like, oh crap. And there was like a couple of times that we were like shouting at each other, and he got up and walked away at one point. I got up and walked away at one point, and Nick was just sitting there trying to be like the mediator between, like going, what did I get myself into when he came up with this idea?
Had you talked to him since he threw the title in the trash back in the day, or still?
Well, there was like 4 years that we feuded in IWA after that had happened. Because like he came back right after it happened, and that was when I hit him with the barbed wire bat that to this day Smart Mark Video says it's like the sickest bat shot that they've seen. Because as I described it on, Nick Manoa was like, okay, well, tell Jimmy Jacobs what was going through your mind as you reared back to hit him with that barbed wire bat. And he was like, and had you guys discussed this at all beforehand? It was like, there was no discussion. And, when I did it, I told Jimmy Jacobs, I was like, there was a 60-40 split in my mind as to whether I was going to hit you in the head or whether I was going to hit you in the back. And the fact that my, 85-year-old grandmother was still alive and wouldn't have been able to survive a murder trial of her grandson. It was like, so I the 40% won out, and, you got it to the back instead of to the head. And he was like, well, thank you, Grandma. And, Manoa was like, well, what were you thinking at that point? And I was like, one of my favorite movies was The Program. And I don't know if you guys have ever watched that one, like a college football movie that came out in the 90s. And the middle linebacker in that movie, like one of his big quotes, like he would break the huddle and stuff. He'd be like, hit the tight end so hard his girlfriend dies. Hit the quarterback so hard as his girlfriend dies. And I was like, so I was going to hit Jimmy Jacobs so hard that Danny Daniels died for paying him to do it. And like Nick Manoa was like, good Lord. And I was like, well, I tried. And I was like, I knew I wasn't going to get Danny Daniels in the ring, so I had to hit Jimmy Jacobs hard enough that he felt it. And Jimmy went, like, after that happened, me and Jimmy were both off shows for quite a while, and then we came back like 8 months later at the TPI 2006 and ran an angle where both of us helped Josh Abercrombie beat Tyler Black in a loser leave town match. And we like shook hands and hugged in the ring, and I could hear people's heads exploding in the front row until I didn't let go of the hug, and I just held him in a bear hug. And Bull and Mitch came out and beat him down in the ring while like Josh cried and like, sorry, I had to do that, but I had to make sure I won and whatever kind of deal. And it led into, it was like I guess September 2006 to the day I quit in August of 2009. The feud was ongoing, where I brought like the Barbarian in and Tracy Smothers and all these people in to try to collect a bounty against him and different things. So like we had talked after that, and then I randomly ran into him at a StarCast convention, because like my best friend loves going to these conventions and getting autographs and stuff. So I tagged along with him to a StarCast convention that Conrad Thompson put on before it was even AEW, and they just did that like pay-per-view with the Young Bucks and Cody doing it on their own. And they did the pay-per-view here in the suburbs of Chicago. And so they had like this convention and just randomly happened to go to it. And I had met Tony Schiavone and got to like cut a promo on the set of Crockett Saturday Night, with Tony Schiavone. And I was leaving that and walking down the hallway, and boom, there was Jimmy Jacobs. And we just like said hello to each other. We took a photo and he posted it onto his Twitter account at the time. So this had to have been like, when was that? Like 2017-ish, 2018, 18, somewhere around there. So and that was like the first time we'd seen each other in almost 10 years at that point. And he posted it on his Twitter, and there was people like, what just happened? How did this happen? And it was, I think the guy that did the guy that does Botchamania, Matthew or whatever his name is. Yeah. He commented on it, and he was like, my mind is blown. My childhood is erased. I can't believe you two took a photo together. And I thought you two hated each other. And it's like, well, just because we posed for a photo doesn't mean we're friends. It just I'm not as inclined to want to kill him now, a decade later, but yeah, getting him onto the podcast was definitely the wildest one, if I had to ask. And then just like some of the people that I just hadn't talked to in 10, 15, some of them 20 years, I hadn't seen them. And, they're reaching out and, hey, can I get onto this? And some of the fans, hey, any chance you'll let me tell some stories? And I was like, well, we'll eventually try. At some point, I'm going to have to talk to everybody. So, just be patient and wait your turn.
It's interesting that you mentioned the fans because I'm a Minnesota guy, and okay. We obviously there was cars that went down to IWA from Minnesota, and there was a handful of fans that would travel as well to go see, though, you know what I mean, travel down to IWA to see their Minnesota guys wrestle in IWA. I never made that trip because I was like, why am I fucking driving that? I'll see them fucking here. Yeah, I'll fucking see them when they're here. But do you have any good stories? Because I'm on the independent scene up here in Minnesota. I still see some of the guys that were in, that wrestled back in IWA. Any good stories about any of the Minnesota cars at all?
Geez,
because it was a while back now.
Yeah, it was a while back. So I just had Rain on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and like I broke news to her. There was a conversation in the locker room one time because Lacey and Rain were like the only women on the IWA shows there for quite a while. And so, of course, the guys are sitting there talking about, oh, well, who's cuter and, who's hotter between Lacey and Rain. And our referee at the time, Brent Blades, came up with like the most outlandish metaphor that we had ever heard before. And he was like, rain is hotter than a toaster. And we had never heard that used to describe a female before, ever. And it like took on a life of its own in the locker room. And everybody just thought that was hilarious. And they kept talking about it. Well, Joel Gertner was on one of the shows. And so Joel Gertner evidently laid claim to being the one that said it. Because before the podcast, I had asked Rain, I was like, are you aware of the hotter than a toaster story? She's like, oh yeah, that's classic. I know that. I know that one. So we can talk about it on the podcast. Don't worry about it. And, because you're sitting there and a lot of this, you're so worried about the stuff that happened in 2002 being so crazy with the way it was back then. You're like, is this going to get canceled in 2026? Is this a story that can be told? And so Rain was like, I give you permission to bring up the hotter than a toaster story. So when I told her that, she was like, Joel Gertner's told me for 22 years that he was the one that came up with that. I was like, no, he was on one of the shows where it had to have been talked about and laid claim to it and took it as his own for all these years. So there was that story with Rain. I mean, I don't really have any great stories about Cannon. He was a great hand, loved having him around. He was IWA Mid South champion for a while. He was actually the one to beat Jimmy Jacobs after the trash can incident to take the title off of him. I didn't have a whole lot of interactions with him. Yeah. I know one night I happened to be at a show with my now wife, and we would all go out to eat afterwards. And there was like one night where I had picked up the check for everybody at the restaurant after one of the shows because there was like 20 people that in attendance. So I knew nobody got paid. So I just went ahead, and as I was leaving, I picked up everybody's check. So then like the next time we were out, I would, my now wife was with me. We had just started dating. So we were at a table by ourselves off to the side, just eating. And then like I asked the waitress for the check, and she pointed to Eric Cannon and said, he just paid for you. So he had returned the favor of me buying him. So he bought me and my wife supper one night. That's really about the only like cool kind of story I've got about, but Eric and Darren Corbin were great to have around, and always loved, Lacey and Rain were always great to have around. They would have great matches. And then once Mickey started training and getting onto the shows, and so they had like Mickey Knuckles, and we ended up bringing in Daisy Hayes, Mischief, Mercedes Martinez, ODB, Tracy Brooks. I mean, that really led to Shimmer, because Ian was letting Dave Prazak like bring in all these women, and Prazak was in control of like, okay, these are the women we're going to use. And he was booking them for the matches. And we ended up doing Volcano Girls, which was an all girls show. And, Prazak to this day will tell you that was what put that without that, Shimmer never happens, because he doesn't see that there's a market for that. In the Minnesota girls were a large part of that, by being able to get that groundwork going, because if they hadn't come in, there's no way that Ian would have accepted training Mickey just with the way that he was. He never would have accepted that. And then there never would have been, the full blown women's division going on. So Lacey, Rain, they played a big part in that. So Minnesota can take a lot of credit for that.
Don't give him any credit up there. Now, James, forever we're going to hear about that. You talk about like 20 years later, people are nervous to tell these stories because they don't want to get canceled. Like, is every episode that you do kind of similar to like the Jimmy Jacobs one, where you don't kind of talk to them beforehand, or do you go in and be like, okay, like what are you comfortable talking about?
I mean, it's always up to the person. You know, there's been a couple of guys that are like, you know, I need to know what we're going to discuss just so they have a chance to like try to go back and look at a match or two of what we're going to talk about so it can refresh their memory. That more so than the worried about getting canceled.
Okay.
More so worried that they're just going to sit there and go, I don't remember. And they're so afraid of that. So there's a lot of times whenever I like book somebody to be on, I'll just tell them, hey, what don't you want to talk about? So we don't have that awkward moment of you telling me that I'm not going to talk about that, which, you know, I should have done when we did an Ask Me Anything that ended up going 6 hours. And so we had to split it into like 3 episodes, but he's on Twitter. He's like tripping balls. Is this wrestling?
Yeah.
And he was like, I have a million questions I want to ask you. Can I do this? And I'm like, I won't shut up. So you know what you're getting yourself into. But there was like some people that he asked me about that I can't stand. So I'm like sitting there yelling and he's going like, and afterwards he had to tell me, he's like, I had to keep telling myself, you're not yelling at me. You're yelling about the question. And, you know, there was just so many different and I should have told him, we're not going to talk about this person. We're not going to talk about this person. We're not going to talk about this person. But he was actually the one that opened the door for Jimmy Jacobs coming on, because like the last question he asked me after 6 hours of grilling me on everything, he was like, if you were stranded in the woods and you're 20 miles from civilization and you got 3 flat tires and you're just stranded and out of luck, and after 3 hours of sitting there, Jimmy Jacobs is the first person that comes by in a car, you know, are you like yanking him out of the car and you're fighting in the street? Are you accepting a ride? What's going on? And I'm like, well, in that situation, I guess I'd kind of have to accept the help and get the ride so I'm not just stranded out here and starved to death or something. And so when I had that answer, that was when Nick then reached out to Jimmy and was like, well, maybe we can squash this beef. And that's not the first time that's happened on the podcast. I had Mean Mitch Page on, and that was a 2-parter because we went so long, and him telling his stories. And, you know, like him and Pondo had a falling out and hadn't talked to each other in forever. I had Pondo on the podcast, and he mentioned on the podcast how much he missed being friends with Mitch and all the fun that they had. And so I brought that up to Mitch in the podcast, and Mitch was like, well, you know, there was some good times with Pondo. And I was like, well, you know, if he reached out to you, would you accept his message? Would you talk to him? And he was like, yeah, I think so. So I immediately started texting Pondo, and I was like, if you were serious about wanting to talk to Mitch, this might be your opportunity. I was like, I just got him in a nostalgic frame of mind and was telling stories. And he said that, you know, he'd be open to hearing from you. And Pondo was like, give me his number. And you know, and they were texting. And so after that, I was like, oh, I think I deserve the next FIFA Peace Prize that's handed out for getting those two back together, you know. And then Manawa tops me by putting me and Jimmy Jacobs together. So maybe he's the one that deserves the Peace Prize now.
James, you got the big weekend, Black Label Pro and Wrestling Arts Indie, and then you said every Friday the podcast drops. Who do you have coming this week?
Well, I said hopefully it's Bull Pain. We're going to see if we get this, if we get it actually recorded tomorrow night. We're going to go with that, and then if not, the scramble is on to start going through my list to see who. Because it'll have to, if I don't get it recorded tomorrow, it's going to have to get recorded Wednesday, and so that Nick Manawa has time to try to edit it and put it together so that it can be ready to release on Friday. I don't know. I know how to run my mouth. That's what I know how to do. So he has to do all the tech part of it, of putting it all together and getting it posted for me. Cause I'm just an old man that can't learn new tricks with this technology stuff. But, so this might be the first time since I started where we just did episode 22. So this will be episode 23, which is technically really 24 because Mitch insisted that his podcast both be numbered 13. So that was 13A and 13B. So I guess this would technically be the 24th one. Might be the first one that we, if we don't get it recorded with Bull tomorrow, might have to skip a week. And I don't want to do that, but real life gets in the way sometimes. And having to do, I still have so much to do to get ready for this weekend that, hopefully Bull will be able to get through this. Say he's not in the best of health, so I'll try not to get him too excitable and try not to ask him about the people that's going to anger him. But it should be a great episode if we get through it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I'm not I mentioned I don't have a lot of knowledge on the IWA Mid South, but I'm definitely intrigued, and I'll be adding this to my podcast queue and checking out some of your other episodes beforehand, because I do like the wrestling history. So I'll check that out. And you mentioned old man, so we ask every single person that comes on the show, when was the last time you shit your pants?
Whew. Well, let's see. I think
putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, this isn't something that I like. Not a memory that's a fond one to just keep it in the Rolodex. So I think there was. I don't know. It's been a long time. I've been with my wife for 20 years now. And I know at one point in that 20 years, there was an incident where we were out in the middle of nowhere driving, and I had too much Wendy's chili.
That'll do it.
And I pulled over and tried to go down in a ditch, and I don't think I made it in time. So it was towards the beginning of the relationship, and God bless her, she's stuck by my side through that. But it's been a long time, but it's been within the last 20 years because it was with her. So
she stuck by your side but stayed in the car, right?
Yeah, she stayed in the car and then made me ride in the back seat with the windows down.
Right answer.
Afterwards.
Look, there's people on the show who maybe don't, they've shit their pants in the last 8 months.
Yeah,
I don't know when the last time Tony shit his pants was, so I can't. He's not here. So
I think he got through 2 Christmases. So,
well, James, this has been an absolute blast. Anytime you want to come back on and shoot the shit and to promote whatever you got going on, we've had all your social media, your YouTube, everything's across the bottom of the screen the whole time you've been on. And
yeah,
if there's some IWA Mid South fans out there, definitely check out Fannins Flashbacks, because I was just on the YouTube channel looking through while we were talking to James, and there's a lot of American Kickboxer, Mickey Knuckles, Tarek the Great, Jimmy Jacobs. There's a lot of great interviews on there. So it's definitely something to check out. And I'm sure the stories are hysterical.
Yeah, there's been so many good stories, and like one of the first ones, just a quick story here. American Kickboxer and Tarek the Great were on the very first IWA Mid South show that was ever held. They were the very first match. They were not booked for the show. Ian put them on the flyer. Ian put their names on the flyer and hung it up around. They were like working OVW, and he hung it around OVW, and they saw the flyer and showed up to the show. Tarek was like, we were discussing, what do we do? We're on this flyer. And he's like, well, let's show up. Evidently we're booked. And they were like, and they said it was actually Rip Rogers that called him and was like, what the fuck are you doing on this, flyer for that motherfucker? And they're like, what are you even talking about? And he's like, Ian Rotten's got you on the flyer. So without him seeing the flyer, without Ian just putting them on the flyer, and so then I asked Tarek, IWA was actually the very first United States promotion that brought Vampiro into the States outside of the state of California. He went to Bardstown, Kentucky in 1997 and wrestled Tarek the Great at a TV taping that for a show that aired like only in the Louisville market. And he was on the show. And I'm like, Tarek, how in the fuck was Ian able to get Vampiro to Bardstown, Kentucky? And we both decided he must have just put him on the flyer. And Rip Rogers saw the flyer and was like, God damn it, Vampiro, what are you doing working for this motherfucker? And, so Vampiro's like, well, I guess I got to show up. So any of you guys out there, just put the guys on the flyer, and sometimes magic happens and they actually show up. So
it still happens, Jim, and it is so magically indie.
James,
but yeah, there's all kinds of stories like that on there. And then, like you said, Black Label Pro has a show Friday night, managing Mickey Knuckles on that one. And then to be determined as to who joins the Fannin family on Saturday night at Wrestle Arts Indy. Both of those are in Indianapolis. So we'll see how those go. And yeah, definitely check out the podcast. And thanks a lot for having me on. This was fun. So anytime you guys get another cancellation and need somebody, reach out, see if I'm available. I'm hard to shut up, so I can fill a lot of time for you.
I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship, James. Jim, what the fuck do we call you?
JJ. Call me JJ if you want. Whatever. I never went by James until I started the shoot job I've got now, and they made me go by my real name. And so that was like the first time I've ever in my entire life. It was the first time I'd gone by James. And now I've been there for 11 years. So it's like, oh my God, I guess now I'm so used to that. I use the work Zoom podcast account to do the podcast. So it's got the James on there. And so that threw Jimmy Jacobs off. He's like, when did you become James? And I'm like, well, the shoot job makes me do the shoot name. So, and I'm too lazy to switch it back and forth every time I go between a work meeting and a podcast. So,
we'll stick with
call
JJ.
me whatever.
Yeah, we'll stick with
JJ works.
Good luck this weekend, my friend, and hopefully we get to talk to you soon, man.
All righty, take care, guys.
Thanks
Fun
a lot,
time being
JJ.
here. Thanks.